5,100 New York City apartments just got thrown into bankruptcy court in May 2025. We're talking about buildings in Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx, where tenants have been living with burst pipes, black mold, gas leaks, and rats the size of small dogs for years. And while they dealt with these nightmare conditions, their landlord Joel Weiner's Pinnacle Group collected $84 million in rent and refused to fix anything. Now, the whole operation has collapsed under over $564 million in debt to Flagstar Bank, and those apartments are being auctioned off to the highest bidder. The Pinnacle Group controlled 80 properties housing more than 5,000 mostly rent-stabilized apartments. These weren't luxury buildings. These were rent-stabilized units where working families have been trapped in deteriorating conditions with nowhere else to go in one of the most expensive housing markets in America. Summit Properties has already put in an opening bid of $451 million to take over the entire portfolio, but tenants are terrified about what comes next. The company got absolutely crushed by interest rates. Back in 2023, Pinnacle was paying $26 million a year in debt service on its properties. By 2025, that number exploded to $45 million annually, according to court filings from Ephraim Diamond, the chief restructuring officer brought in to handle the bankruptcy. That's a 75% increase in debt payments, while rental income stayed basically flat because of rent stabilization rules. When interest rates rose from below 4% to over 10% in just 2 years, the entire business model fell apart. But here's what makes this story different from a typical bankruptcy. Between 2019 and 2024, the number of immediately hazardous housing code violations at Pinnacle buildings increased 400%. That's 4 times the rate of increase at similar rent-stabilized buildings in New York City. While Weiner was drowning in debt, he wasn't just cutting back on upgrades, he was letting buildings fall into genuinely dangerous conditions. Tenants have been filing letters with the bankruptcy court describing situations that sound completely insane for Manhattan apartments. One tenant wrote to the court saying they hadn't had working heat for 3 winters straight. Another described how a ceiling collapse in their bathroom went unrepaired for over a year, forcing them to shower at a gym. Multiple residents reported that Pinnacle simply stopped responding to repair requests entirely sometime in 2024, leaving them to deal with hazardous conditions on their own or pay for fixes out of pocket that they'll never get reimbursed for. The court documents paint a picture of a company that was using every trick in the book to squeeze money out of these buildings instead of actually maintaining them. Pinnacle was using building management fees and condo conversion profits to make mortgage payments instead of using rental income. They were basically running a Ponzi scheme where new deals and conversions paid for old debt. When the music stopped and interest rates spiked, everything collapsed. Joel Weiner became a billionaire in 2017, despite being a constant target of tenant complaints and fraud investigations. In 2022, he was penalized after admitting he didn't properly disclose needed capital repairs at a Forest Hills condo conversion. His whole business model was buying rent-stabilized buildings, doing the absolute minimum maintenance legally required, and trying to push out tenants so he could convert units to market rate or condos. The bankruptcy filing shows this strategy was never sustainable. Pinnacle owes money to more than 100 creditors beyond Flagstar Bank. There are millions of dollars owed to facilities providers, contractors, and vendors who haven't been paid in months. Israeli bondholders are owed over $500 million from companies Weiner personally owns. The total debt across all entities tops $1.1 billion. Pinnacle tried to blame New York's 2019 Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act for their problems. The law put restrictions on how much repair costs could be passed on to tenants and made it harder to remove units from rent stabilization. But other landlords operating under the exact same rules aren't ending up in bankruptcy court with buildings full of violations and tenants living in squalor. This wasn't about regulation killing a legitimate business. This was about an over-leveraged operator who built an empire on debt and deferred maintenance. Summit Properties emerged as the stalking horse bidder in December 2025, agreeing to pay $451.3 million for the portfolio. But there's a catch. If Flagstar Bank doesn't agree to provide financing for the purchase, the price automatically drops to $420 million. Other bidders have until January 8, 2026 to submit higher offers at a bankruptcy auction. The tenants themselves are trying to buy their buildings. A group representing residents at 40 of the properties has been exploring ways to purchase their homes and finally get them properly maintained. They've organized as the Union of Pinnacle Tenants and have been working with housing advocates to put together their own bid. The chances of outbidding real estate companies with hundreds of millions in capital seem pretty slim, but they're trying anyway because they know what's at stake. This is where New York City officials started panicking. The city filed papers this week saying whoever buys these buildings cannot walk away from the existing housing violations. Officials want guarantees that the new owner will have to fix all the hazardous conditions and not start fresh with a clean slate. They're worried Summit or another buyer might try to acquire the properties free and clear of any obligation to make repairs, leaving tenants in the same dangerous conditions they've been dealing with for years. The city's concern is legitimate. In bankruptcy court, assets often get sold as is with previous liabilities wiped clean. That's actually part of what makes distressed properties attractive to investors. They can buy at a discount and start fresh without inheriting years of deferred maintenance claims and violation fines. But in this case, we're talking about 5,000 apartments where people are living in genuinely hazardous conditions. If those obligations disappear in bankruptcy, tenants get screwed twice. New York City's intervention in the bankruptcy process tells you how seriously officials are taking this. They don't want another landlord coming in with the same playbook Weiner used: buy cheap, maintain minimally, and try to push out rent-stabilized tenants. The 2019 housing law was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of predatory ownership, but it didn't account for what happens when these landlords go bankrupt. The broader implications here are massive. If Summit or another buyer can acquire these properties without inheriting the violation obligations, it sets a precedent for how landlords can use bankruptcy to escape accountability for neglecting rent-stabilized buildings. Other over-leveraged landlords watching this case might see bankruptcy as a way to reset the clock on deferred maintenance while keeping the underlying real estate assets. The auction on January 8th will determine who controls these 5,100 apartments and what happens to the families living in them. Summit's $451 million bid values the portfolio at about $88,000 per unit, which is remarkably cheap for New York City real estate, even in terrible condition. For context, the median apartment sale price in Manhattan is over $1 million. These are rent-stabilized units in decent neighborhoods that are selling for a fraction of market value because they come loaded with violations and unhappy tenants. Whoever wins the auction is going to face immediate pressure from the city, tenant groups, and housing advocates to fix the violations. But there's no legal mechanism forcing them to do it quickly, and the bankruptcy process might shield them from the financial penalties Pinnacle would have faced. That's what has city officials scrambling to intervene before the sale goes through. Joel Weiner built a billion-dollar fortune buying rent-stabilized buildings and running them into the ground. When his debt caught up with him, he declared bankruptcy and walked away from the mess he created. Now 5,000 families are waiting to find out if their next landlord will be any better, or if they're about to go through the same cycle again with a different name on the checks. What do you think should happen to landlords like Weiner who let buildings deteriorate to this level? Should they be banned from owning rental properties, or is bankruptcy protection enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to stay updated on how this auction plays out, make sure you're subscribed because this story is far from over.